When we did Becoming Explore, I put on the screen the same symbol of the yin and yang from the Tao, from Taoism. And I keep getting drawn back to this symbol. And when we're conceptualizing hope, it made me think about the week, and it made me think about just kind of what's going on again in our nation. And then I heard President Biden on National Prayer Day, what he spoke of. And so I'm just going to kind of read what he said, because he does speak of hope. And I wanted to ground what I'm going to say in how he conceptualized the dark and hope. So he said, "Now I have attended many of these prayer breakfasts over the years with a nation at war and struggle and strife, a nation of peace and prosperity, a nation, though, always in prayer. What we know this time is different." He said, "For so many in our nation, this is a dark, dark time. So where do we turn? Faith." And then he went on to say, "For me, in the darkest moments, faith provides hope and solace, provides clarity and purpose as well." So then I just wrote a little bit of a reflection, and I'll keep it on here, but then I'll go back to the symbol. So I wrote this morning, I was meditating on this and wrote, when I think about his words, Biden's words, I am reminded of the Tao and the way that light and dark is represented in a balanced state. Biden talks about this dark, dark time. When we take in the yin and yang image, we can imagine being within the darkness. So when I was meditating, I was thinking about being right here in this space, in the majority of the darkness of the yang, and what that would feel like, what that would mean. For many of us, it doesn't take much right now for this imagining during the pandemic, when so many of us, including my mom, my Aunt Pat, and I, we recently lost Sister Imelda, who was she was on the very first call of Becoming Joy. She succumbed to COVID after having had an accident and being in the hospital. And so our hearts are heavy too during this time. And she died on Christmas morning, though. So in a way, it was a hopeful prayer, because she went out in the glory of the faith that she had committed her whole life to. So we've been uprooted in various palpable ways. And Biden says that in his darkest moments, it is faith that provides hope and solace, clarity and purpose. And so meditating on the yin and yang symbol, I conceptualize his words like this: "Within the darkness, there can be great despair. However, within the darkness, there is always a choice to either remain there or to seek the light." For me, Biden is saying that faith is what gives us a choice. And another way I call it is like a choice point. It is faith, or the higher trust and purpose, that reaches into our hearts and lets us know that we do not have to remain in darkness if we do not wish to. And I was telling my mom and Aunt Pat that sometimes, though, I have wrapped myself in darkness like a cloak, and I've needed to stay in that for a while until I'm ready to listen to the teachings of what the darkness is telling me. And so sometimes I have chosen to remain in the darkness, but as long as I'm aware that I'm doing that I'm consciously aware that I'm doing that, I think then that perhaps that is the difference between being cloaked in it willingly and succumbing to complete despair. But it is hope that I believe. When you think of the yin and yang, if you think of the darkness of the yang and that little circular white light, that's what I was thinking about. But it is hope that I believe is that little spark of light in the darkness that illuminates more brightly when we allow our faith to remind us of our self-agency, to choose hope over despair. We can see this concept represented in the symbol. And that said, I do want to maybe share maybe just one story that will illuminate what hope can look and feel like. Because I think many times we believe that hope is like an abstraction, but it is actually, when you embody it, it's an actual energy. It's a consciousness um, of being that, when we're open to it, it can be embodied through emotion and vibrational resonance. And so I think I have these two down here, but I think I'm actually going to tell a different story now that it's coming to mind. And I'm not going to name her, but she has been a child in my life for a very long time. And now she's beginning to be a young adult. And when she's gone through a lot in her life, and I've shared a lot of her ups and downs. And I remember one day, this was maybe when she was Goya's age, maybe a little bit older, so maybe like 13. She told me that she often finds herself alone in the darkness, and that it is suffocating. And so we were talking about that and meditating upon that, like what that felt like, why it was happening. And she just said that she feels like she can't breathe. It's so suffocating. And so then we started imagining, I'm like, well, can you imagine maybe a ladder coming down to reach you down because she called it the well of despair. And so I said, but let's just be in that space and imagine the well of despair that you're in. Let's imagine a little opening at the very, very top, just a little tiny pinprick of light, of an opening. And through that light, can you imagine a ladder coming down to reach you? And she said, yes, I see a ladder. And then she said, after we talked for a long time, she's like, I want to make the choice to climb up the ladder. She goes, but I need help. I need help. I need someone to help me with that. And so we talked about what it would take for her to climb that ladder slowly but surely. And she said that the ladder was very, very, very long, that it was going to take her a really long time to climb up towards that light. And when I asked her about it, maybe a few weeks later, and then a year later, and then months later, she was still making her way up the ladder. But she said with every step, that pinprick of light started opening a little bit larger for her. And if I ask her today if she is still in the well of despair, I think she would say she's not in the depths of it, but she's emerging towards that space of light. It's even brighter than it was, but it's taken a really long time for her to reach there. And so that's how I have conceptualized hope, what hope kind of feels like and what it can mean and how it can be visualized. Because I think sometimes we need an anchor, to help, like the ladder to me was a sort of an anchor for her to be able to make it something very physical and concrete so that she could actually see the step in front of her, the ladder, each step of the ladder in front of her. And she actually needed to see that in her mind's eye so she could actually work her way towards it. So I think that's also what Biden is talking about when he's talking about faith. If faith is the ability for us to choose within the darkness, if we want to remain in the despair or try to find another way, maybe out or through it, then hope is that little bit of light that is illuminating within the darkness that helps us to reach through and out of what this young woman called the well of despair. So I hope that brings some solace for us today.
Well, the power of imagination to be able to see visually a ladder, right? That is powerful. So I guess now it's time for my story. Shall I go ahead then? All right. Lots of stories today. In fact, the story I'm telling is a compilation of a lot of stories. And apologies to Kristen and Amy, who have gotten a little taste of this story already. I sort of practiced on them a little bit. But anyway, okay. So this word light keeps showing up when we talk about hope. you know, the light at the end of the tunnel is what people say when, you know, like, well, it's pretty bad, but, you know, maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you know, and you know, when you look at someone who has no hope, you can see the light went out in their eyes. The light just went out. And, but this story that I'm going to tell is really, the bottom line is hope does not walk alone. Just like in that song, when you walk through a storm, hold your head up high. You know that one, and at the end it says, walk on with hope in your heart and you'll never walk alone. But, and never walking alone means there are other people that'll help, right? So anyway, this is based on a TED Talk. All right, so hopefully everybody hasn't already watched that. But so this is her name is Barbara Scher, and she lives. This takes place in New York, and at 36, she's old. She's an older woman now, but at the age of 36, she found herself being divorced, a young mother with two very small children. She couldn't get a daycare center, so she couldn't get a job. And so things did not look very good for her. But she finally did get a daycare center, and she finally got a job washing dishes. And she thought, we made it. My kids are in a daycare center. I have a job washing dishes. And then the next thought was, is this it? Is this the story of my life now? She says, is it going to say at my gravestone, her house was frequently clean for very brief periods of time. So she thought, well, I'm not very good at anything, but I'm 36 and I have a lot of life left. So let's see what can happen. And she said it was the 60s, and it was you can create your own reality time. And she says, well, I was raised in the 50s, so some of that didn't really resonate with me. I went to these gatherings where they said, stand up and say, I can do it. And she stood up and said, I can do it. And then she says, but I couldn't. So that didn't work for me. She says, I'm not a new age lady, I'm an old age lady. She said, but she did start going to these encounter groups at night after work. And she said, in case you don't know, an encounter group it was started back in the 60s by psychiatrists working with people with the drug, people into drugs. And so there was a lot of, they'd yell at you and try to break you down, so then you could get down to your feelings. She said, well, this was great for me because I grew up in a family where everybody yelled at each other. I was good at it. And so they hired me to be a leader. And so she said, so she started having these meetings, and she said, but it was the Tuesday night meetings that really stood out. And that was a meeting where she said, I can't remember his name, so I just call him Ronnie. But Ronnie would come to every meeting, and Ronnie was someone who never had any awareness of any feeling whatsoever. And he pretty much came because it was his social group. But there was something about Ronnie that just made people want to smack him, apparently. He seemed to just leak hostility. And so she said this was very useful because people would come in, if they couldn't get in touch with their feelings, they'd look at Ronnie, they'd get mad, and then you're off to a start, And she said, I'm just going to refer to my notes here. She said, yeah, he was the kind of person who they had to walk him home every night because they were afraid somebody would hurt him on the way home. And so one woman comes in and to tell her story. This is this particular Tuesday night, I guess. She comes in to tell her story, and she says, well, she couldn't get any feelings going either. So she says, well, my